Hello, everyone. This lecture is about primary research. It's intended to be a simple how-to guide for how to do it. We know this is a new kind of process for you, and we're excited to show you that it's really not as scary as it sounds. And quite frankly, it's one of the most valuable things students have told me they do in this course. So primary research is sometimes referred to as ethnographic interviews, and it's really conducting phone, virtual, or in-person interviews with actors. And the kinds of actors that are really important to talk with are, of course, the potential users of your intervention. You may also want to talk to beneficiaries so you can figure out how to help them. And you may want to talk to experts so you can get a deeper and richer understanding of the problem. All of these primary research interviews can be incredibly valuable. So primary research is usually considered one-on-one conversation, so it's not focused groups or panels. And the reason for this is that you often get more in-depth, focused, and targeted information from picking up the phone and speaking one-on-one. Primary research is a technique that you can leverage throughout your capstone development process. In fact, when I designed prize competitions for XPRIZE, I probably did anywhere from 50 to 150 research interviews. And I would really encourage you to do as many as you can throughout the life of your project. So let's talk first about early stage primary research, because it can be different from the kind of primary research that you do later on in a project. The goal of the early stage primary research is to learn more about the problem and grand challenge area and to really investigate and very curious about why it hasn't been solved yet. So the goals of the interviews, primarily with experts at this stage, should be to understand the grand challenge, the problem landscape, and the innovation landscape. So what really is the magnitude of the problem? Why does it exist? And what are people doing that's really interesting to solve it? You want to explore the most impactful problem to address, why the problem hasn't been solved, and also to work and continue to identify potential norms or even values and beliefs might help put you on the right track, and identify possible deviants, behaviors that you can use to disrupt those norms. And you really want to evaluate the landscape for the best diffusion methods. So understand what are the best ways to scale your idea and how to reach your potential users and beneficiaries. So the goals of your user interview should be a little bit different than that of your expert interview. You want to really understand what your user thinks is the problem and what are the problems from their perspective. You want to understand their needs and their pain points. Specifically around a specific problem or the existing solutions. You want to explore their motivations and what would motivate them to engage with your intervention. You also want to better understand their life and point of view. Above all, you want to create and connect at a place of empathy with your user. And lastly, you also may want to see if you can identify norms and deviants from your conversations with your user. But again, the real point of talking with your user is to make sure that you're really understanding what are their needs, how do they see the problem, and how do you solve their particular sets of problems? Whereas with the expert, you're trying to understand the problem landscape a little bit more generally. So one of the trick that you can do is to apply your ID lenses to think about the conversation and help prepare for your interviews. So you might think about what questions you have in the areas of actors, history, future, limits, parthood, and configuration. You may also, as you're looking through your notes, want to kind of think about those lenses and see if you see any kind of curious or interesting areas to explore. You may find after talking with an expert, for example, that some new ways some new configurations emerged. And you might think, oh, I might be able to organize this differently. Or what if I go at it from this other way that people don't usually think about it? So keep your ID handy because it will help you in doing the analysis. So later stage primary research, as I mentioned, is slightly different. At this point, you're really using your interviews to get feedback on your ideas and to get specific targeted advice, especially from outside of your area of expertise. So this is a great excuse to pick up the phone and call those technologists or researchers that you've been wanting to chat with and ask them for help and ask them for their perspective. And your capstone is a great excuse to spur those conversations. So this is really a fantastic technique to begin to develop relationships and seek understanding from outside your specific knowledge sets. So you may want to identify some things with the experts that you talk with. You may want to start to investigate at this stage why your project might fail. You want to look for barriers to implementation of your intervention, and you also want to look at opportunities to mitigate either those points of failure or those potential barriers. You also want to look for points of differentiation. What makes your project different from other projects out there, and what makes your kind of unique value proposition? You also want to think about what are your opportunities for innovation, and potentially who are your competitors or people doing similar things in the marketplace. So again, that you can create a unique and powerful offering that is different from what other people are doing. You also can ask about resources, and people can connect you with either additional experts, potentially even funders and other supporters. So it's really good to keep an ear out for those. You don't want to overly solicit on any calls, but it certainly doesn't hurt to ask if there's anyone else they think that you should talk with. So let's talk a little bit about some interviewing process and strategies so that we can show you exactly how to approach the process of doing your primary research interview. So preparation, preparation, preparation is absolutely the name of the game. The more prepared you are, the less nerves you're going to feel. And it just really helps for you to prepare for any pivots that kind of happen in the conversation. It actually, the more preparation you do, the more flexible you're going to be able to be during the call or conversation itself. So first off, I always develop a questionnaire. I think about all of the questions I have. For the purpose of this course, you're going to be asked to deliver 10 questions, but it's plenty okay to have more. And it's honestly, even during an interview, really okay to depart from it if you choose to. You may find that there's some really interesting line of questions that either that user or that expert is going to be able to open up for you that you'd rather explore. I will put one caveat to this, which is that sometimes you may want to have a specific set of questions or a number of questions that you ask every expert or every user so that you can begin to get at least a sense of what everyone is saying about some of the most important questions you have. This isn't a mandate, and it really depends on your style and your process, whether or not you want to ask some of the same questions over and over again, or whether you want each interview to be custom. Either way, you'll get a ton out of these conversations. So you definitely want to identify targets, and it's actually kind of surprising, but you don't need all that many. A good 5 to 10 to start can actually often lead to many more interviews. So it's good to figure out who do you want to talk with up front and some of the kinds of people you'd like to speak with. But again, you don't have to have 50 or 100 to produce 50 or 100 targets. It often begins to emerge organically. You also want to keep an eye out from your secondary research about experts that you really want to talk to. And it's also okay to identify some dream or stretch targets. I've had students successfully call up leading researchers in a particular field and have really valuable conversations. So you can use your capstone project as a great excuse to pick up that phone and have that reach call. The worst that happens is they won't be able to take your call or speak with you, but you'd be plenty surprised at who will take the time to reach out and how helpful they can be to you. So you can keep the conversations that you have with your experts or your users somewhat general, or sometimes if there's a researcher that has or an expert that has a specific point of view or specific expertise, you may want to focus on that topic. So for example, if I was working on applying artificial intelligence to homelessness, I might have many general conversations with homelessness experts, but then when I got to the AI expert, I might specifically ask them all of my questions about how artificial intelligence could be used and specific points of intersection that have come up. Again, that's all at your discretion as to what you think you need to get out of any particular conversation. You want to schedule at least 30 minutes for an interview, but I strongly think an hour is best. This is, sometimes when you're dealing with leadership or very busy people, I've settled for 15 minutes. This is for the really VIPs out there. But truthfully, like I said, 30 minutes or an hour is best. The reason for that is that sometimes it takes a little while for you to get into the phone call, for you to do mutual introductions, for you to explain what you're trying to get out of the phone call. And then that really only, by the time you've done all that, you really only have 20 or 30 minutes left sometimes. So better to allow more time so that you can have a comfortably paced conversation than to try to feel rushed or to try to skip intros that can help you both warm up to one another. You absolutely want to schedule a call in advance. And I usually request all of my interviews through email. I put the request up front in bold. I cut right to the chase, and even in the header say I'm requesting an interview so they know exactly what you're trying to get out of them. And I do it right away within the beginning. Sometimes then I follow with more details about the project. And in some cases, I've even attached a one-page overview. No hard and fast rules, but you definitely want to make sure that you're preparing them with enough information to help and that you're really making a very clear request of how you hope to use their time. One of my super secret tricks is that you should always follow up at least once. I would say that 70% of my respondents respond on the second interview request. So don't settle for one, send one, wait a couple days, send one again. I've even sent them third times. Just always be polite. And leverage your network or credentials. Letting them know you're a student from USC certainly can't hurt. And feel free to leverage any other connections or introductions that you have, as long as that's permissible by your connection point. So you can just grab a little bit of water, and then we'll continue up on what to do to warm up the call and have intros. Okay, so warming up and intros. First of all, introduce yourself and explain your project. Disclose your project intent and the intent of the interview. So I'm Stephanie Wander. I'm a professor from the University of Southern California. I would love to speak with you about homelessness and the intersectionality with artificial intelligence, and maybe even tell you a little bit about my idea. That's all you need, just enough time, but it's good to have that elevator pitch on hand for when you do it. Have it ready to go. It should be 3 sentences. If you feel like it's necessary, offer confidentiality between the interviewee and the student and the professor. So say, I'm happy to keep this interview confidential, except that I may share certain overall takeaways with my professor. If they prefer not to give their name, that's fine. You can, we'll talk about this in a separate talk, but the gist is that you can offer them anonymity and say, I don't have to include your name in my summary information. I can use some other kind of identifying characteristic. You may want to ask him or her to introduce him or herself. Even though you should know them and have done a little bit of looking them up online via LinkedIn or through a web page or whatnot about their bios and that kind of background info, it sometimes helps them to tell you a little bit about who they are, the perspective that they bring, and to make sure that they know that you know the expertise that they're bringing to the table or the background that they're bringing to the table. It can also help them warm up and just make you both feel like you're getting to know each other. So it can be a really useful step. If you wish to record, you should always ask if it's okay to record. It is illegal to record somebody without their knowing it. And this can break either way. Sometimes recording an interview can really shut down a deep and connected conversation. People may be a little nervous, or they may not feel as comfortable saying certain things. That said, sometimes they often forget that they're being interviewed and the conversation goes well, and that way you have that to go back to for notes or your own purposes. Again, if you are going to record them, though, be very clear that you talk with them about what the intent of your recording is. You may want to clarify, again, if the interview is anonymous or if you intend to actually cite the person directly. So you just want to be clear that if you're going to say, Professor so-and-so said this or user so-and-so said that you've really cleared with them that you're able to say that or include it. You can, of course, cite them potentially anonymously in your work. But you just, again, want to set clear expectations with your interviewees about what you will and won't share about the conversation. You should absolutely disclose if you intend to earn money or develop a business, and in particular have any affiliations with competitors. So, or that are in conflict with the potential interviewee. So of course, if you're interviewing Coke, you don't want to be working for Pepsi at that point. So just make sure that you've disclosed for them if you are starting a business or something that would relate and be a conflict of interest, essentially. We'll talk about this more in a separate talk, but our guidance is also to follow the general ethical restraints and cautions of the profession, especially when engaging with users and clients. So people that are actually clients or experiencing the problem will want to have extra sensitivities, and there's a whole separate talk dedicated to that. So now comes the Q&A part after you've done the introduction part. In this section, you want to ask questions and take notes. You want to make sure that you seek clarity. So if you don't understand what they're saying, gently pause and ask them to explain or define a term. You should be curious. Approach all of these conversations with a beginner's mind and really explore what they have to say. One of my trade secrets is sometimes I ask the obvious, even shall we say, the dumb question. Sometimes I've found that those unlock whole new ways of thinking. It forces the expert who may have made a series of assumptions to step back and explain those assumptions or question those assumptions. And easily half the time you arrive at a really exciting place. And I've been so glad that I took the risk and asked it. Now, every now and then I do get a funny look, or someone thinks that I maybe, is not as expert as they are, and that's okay. but I think it's well worth it to roll the dice and ask those obvious questions that may not be obvious to you. You definitely don't want to ask questions, though, that can be answered through secondary research. The point is not to have them do research for you or have them tell you things that you could look up or read in an article. The point is to actually ask them questions, engage with that. So it's a good reason for that. It's good also for that reason to prepare and look at some of their articles and be familiar with their work before you talk to them, certainly at least in an expert case. As much as possible, you want to be neutral. That gets hard sometimes when we're dealing with our own projects, but you want to try to respect what they have to say and bring things to the table. If you're presenting ideas to them about a possible intervention, you want to explain where you're coming from, but try not to get defensive. The whole point is you're actually asking them to help you fail your ideas or tell you what's not working so that you can iterate and develop your ideas that much faster. Absolutely expect naysayers, awkward moments. Sometimes you have tough conversations, and that's part of the primary research game. The goal is that hopefully you get better and better as you do this process. So if you have one or two bad interviews, just chalk it up to learning. And sometimes you have a tough customer. I've definitely had interviewees that were busy or had a tough day. And in those calls, sometimes you might want to pivot and actually change topic or take it on a track where you think you can get helpful information, especially when they shut you down. Lastly, be prepared for and also embrace disruption of your project. The whole point is to get new information, new perspectives, and sometimes we think we've got everything figured out just right, and then we get a curveball. And that's part of the fun and dynamism of doing these kinds of projects. So know that this is really part of what you're looking for and is part of the positive outcome that you're trying to get by having primary research interviews. When you're wrapping, think about ending on time as much as you possibly can. It's really important to respect the time, especially if you've gotten 30 minutes or an hour of it. Of course, thank them. Ask if you can stay in touch. Sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no. But it's a great way to begin to build a community of people with whom you can bounce ideas, especially for the ones where you have a really great conversation or really great rapport that you've developed. You want to confirm any follow-up. So if they've offered to send you articles, if you've offered to send them something, you want to make sure that you just confirm what actions you're going to take after the call and make sure that you actually follow up on that. Lastly, ask if there's anyone else they recommend you speak with. Again, this will unlock many more future calls and experts. Sometimes they say no, but again, sometimes they do say yes, and they provide you with great connections that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten. This can also be a good way when you're doing a lot of different interviews to see how well you're becoming familiar with the community. Towards the end of a cycle of doing 50 or 150 interviews, I often have people telling me that I should talk to people that I've already talked to, and that's a really rewarding feeling. So after you've done the interview, your work isn't quite yet done. You want to make sure that you review the notes. So I go back, depending on whether I've written them down or whether or not I've typed them up, but I usually like to annotate or highlight and pull out the really key important insights that came out of the call. I often will put at the top of my full notes the key takeaways. What were the really important big aha moments and insights? You can go so far as to even organize it around trends. So if you've asked them about the problem state and you begin to see 5 different consistent areas that experts identify, you may want to start to pull together what those experts have said to paint a fuller picture. One of the most important things that you can do at this part of the process is capture and research unknown vocabulary. Especially when you're starting out, especially if you're dealing with experts, you want to make sure that you are speaking the same language that they are. And this can help you get a lot smarter, a lot faster about the world that you're looking into. So let me give you a last few pro tips, just some extra things that will help you. So again, I think learning the vocabulary, if it's a different field, is super important, especially when you're dealing with experts. I also encourage you to try not to lead the witness. This is super important. So it's sometimes hard when we have points of view or perspective and we want to confirm our ideas. We may want to get to those out of the gate, but we don't really want to like precede them or tell them what we think is the right answer. We really want them to respond to us organically and give them the benefit of their perspective and their point of view. So when possible, ask those open-ended questions and really try to let them tell you what they think rather than what it is that you think or what you believe and getting their confirmation. After you've gotten that open-ended feedback, then you can say, okay, at that point, here's my idea. What do you think? but you want to make sure that you build to that and don't start from that place where you're sort of telling them what to tell you back. I prefer to type notes for easy searching later for keyword searches, but some people are paper note takers, and either is fine. It's whatever works for you. As I said, organizing themes into a grid can be really helpful so you can see similar answers to questions and different kinds of trends. Again, you may want to ask some of the same questions so that you can have at least a little bit of citable data across the group of people that you spoke with. You also want to consider using this as a technique for your capstone development outside of class. So you should be feeling free now that you've been trained in this technique to do this throughout the rest of your program to help build evidence for your capstone. Don't be afraid to share your respect for their work in the field if it's genuine. If you think someone's done really impressive work, if you're excited to speak with them, that's okay. Tell them. Most often, you know, we all work kind of, you know, focused, blinders on, and it can be a real breath of fresh air when someone tells us what a meaningful contribution we're making or how much they enjoyed reading a certain article or engaging with us in a certain way. So don't be afraid to share that. Don't overly defer to their expertise. They are experts, but you also have a unique point of view and have done work yourself. So feel free to explore and don't just assume that because they're the expert, they're always right. That said, the flip side is don't attack them if you disagree. Make sure that you keep the conversation cordial and polite. Even if they say something that you absolutely disagree with, maybe even find offensive, remember that they're still taking the call. And so it's your job to be a good host, so to speak, and make sure that you have rich discussion, but that it's polite discussion. And lastly, regardless of what happens on the phone call, even if it goes kind of south or in a direction you didn't expect, do your best to exit gracefully. Try to remember that you're representing the school, that you're representing the field of social work, and you're representing yourself, and you want to leave the person with as good an impression as you possibly can. So now for users, it's a little bit different, right? So our experts are all about getting information seeking and engaging in those dynamics. But the dynamics with users or beneficiaries might be a little different. The number one thing, and I pretty much have confidence in all of you that you can do this, is to start from a place of empathy. So really try to respect where they are coming from and forge a real connection, and use that as the basis and foundation of your phone call. Explain your goals and project. Try to do so in language that they understand. Again, ask open-ended questions, and same thing applies here. Try not to lead the witness. It's important as part of your ethical constraints and guidelines that you don't coerce anyone's participation. So you want to make sure that if they're clients or part of your business operation in some way, that you're not inadvertently influencing them or putting undue influence on them to participate. You definitely want to let them know it's voluntary, that they're helping you, but it's by no means an obligation. Again, proceed slowly and carefully so you can feel out the conversation. Of course, be careful to not promise or commit to anything that you can't follow through on. And again, for these kinds of conversations, you may need to exit gracefully as well. And again, on the user side, just again, be conscious of the social work ethics and constraints. And again, we'll be talking about those in the next lecture. So that's all I have for you on primary research. I hope this helps and makes you feel a little bit more comfortable doing these interviews. If you have any questions, please reach out to me or your professor. We're absolutely happy to help. Good luck. I think this will be an exciting part of your work.